think we're recording, Jason. Thanks for joining me tonight. I know we've had some full times lately. Um, Tonight we have Jason Stewart Sierra joining us. He is the managing director for district support at the Holdsworth Center. And I've known Jason for quite a while, and he's been really significant in my journey in the Episcopal Church. And so it's great to talk to you tonight, Jason. Thanks for joining us here at St. John's and sharing some of your story and your life journey with us. Let's see. Oh, where did we meet, Jason? Like the first time was at YSERV conference, and that was at Sewanee. So that was, I'm not sure what year that was. I'm not sure if you can recall.
Yeah, it'd be 2010, 2011, something like that.
Yeah.
That seem right?
Yeah, that sounds it. Wow. And that young YSERV was like a discernment conference, which ties into what we're talking about tonight, vocation, and it was for young Episcopalians of color to maybe consider vocation, what God might be calling them to, lay or ordained ministry, and it's really impactful. It was a great time. It was actually at Sewanee, Tennessee, which I had never really heard of until that conference with you, and then it became a
Look
more
where it led. Yeah.
a more significant part of my journey.
Yeah. And it's funny because that conference, prior to that, it had been a conference called Does It Fit? Which was about like, does the caller fit? And can you find a calling within ordained ministry? But the ethnic ministers and myself as the young adult minister for the church had sort of decided to rebrand and expand it to think much more broadly about vocation. So that was the first time we had done it as Why Serve? Why should I be called to serve? Why should I serve? And so that was a chance for us to sort of redefine that, which was, yeah, it all comes full circle.
Yeah, wow, that's so neat. I wasn't even thinking about that. Yeah, we met at a discernment conference about like vocation, and I'm glad you all expanded it. Because honestly, part of what we've discussed is sometimes we talk about discernment or calling. It just is about the white collar, and I'm glad at that even that YSERV conference, it wasn't just about that. It was just about every person having a calling and trying to explore that and giving time and space to do that, which I think is just always necessary because we're kind of always on that journey of figuring out what's next, or what am I called to do. So yeah, I think just kind of starting off when we're talking about vocation, just what comes to your mind, or how do you think of that word? Just kind of define the terms as you are familiar and use them as we just kind of explore and start the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I think vocation for me, I start from Beekner of where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need, and I think for me it's the joy, it's the strength, it's the passion that you have for. I mean, it might be a talent. Some people might call it that, but where does what you bring to the world or what you bring uniquely to the world like meet the need that you witness, or that you feel or experience, and how can you sort of respond to that? Because I think vocation is both internal and external. So it's got to be this relationship between what I feel I bring to the world and what the world really needs from me. Because I think there's like self actualization is a similar term, but it can be a little bit sometimes interpreted a little more selfishly as like, how do I find a space for me to be my fullest self, as opposed to how do I bring myself to service? Because I really understand vocation as stepping into and up to a role that's sort of, or a space that's fit for you. Yeah. So I think that's where
That's
I'd
really
start.
that's really interesting. Because I think I do hear sometimes when people talk about finding myself or my purpose, sometimes it is more just about them, but you have a real sensitivity to service. Where does that come from about, I mean, the Beekner quote, but that kind of value you have to identify that?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was 4 years old, my dad followed his calling to become an Episcopal priest, and so he left being a draftsman, and we moved to the Shota House, where he began a life of ministry, and he felt a really strong calling, and I think, and then felt a calling to go from Nashotah House to he was wanted to go back to Colorado where I was born, but then got a calling to go to South Texas and to the border, and that was hard and like not where he or definitely my mom wanted to be in Texas. She's from Colorado, and there's a little bit of I don't know. There's feelings. But they decided to follow that calling, and I think they've always just talked about the need to go where you're sent, and to go and serve, not feeling like, I mean, part of it's probably just not feeling worthy to like take something just because it's yours, or because you have the opportunity to. But I think that there's a power in that feeling of like there's a bigger picture out here, and I need to be in service of that bigger picture. And my dad is probably one of the most loving people that I know, and caring, and always struggling with what is that line between how do I show up with myself and also how do I just respond to the need that's so pressing. I think especially as a clergy person, that need just comes at you all the time in terms of people's emotional needs and their like pastoral needs, and also the needs of the community. I mean, we were he served a parish that was in mostly like middle to low income neighborhood, and so there were homeless folks and there were people who really just needed like some financial assistance, who would come to the door of the church and ask for help, and um, he always did his best to be there to respond even when he didn't feel like he had the skills, and I think that just set an example for me that like I should be serving. I need to find this place where I can give, not necessarily give back, but where I can give of myself and like respond to the abundance of love and care and opportunity that I have the privilege of, in order to serve from that place.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, not getting back, but just the perspective of my life impacts other people and how do I want those to meet. And I think I have some folks that I met along the journey or you just read about or encounter in various ways where they did their thing and it was kind of that it just kind of ended with them. You know what I mean? Like that's what they want to do. They kind of dreamed of it, and there was no real kind of even acknowledgement that there was other people or a service need or there's something there. And maybe there's different seasons too where you just kind of focus in on what this one more task or goal. But it seems like from a very young age for you, finding your thing and who you were, you kind of understood in the larger context, just kind of modeled for you there.
Yeah, that was part of it, and I think I also, because that's a good call out. As I Because coming out of college, I knew I wanted to be an artist. Like I wanted to paint and I wanted to design, and I was a graphic designer, and so um, mostly self-taught, but I had a lot of experience, and so
Yeah,
that's what I thought I wanted to do. And it's something I love doing. I can get lost in it, like I get in flow, and I can just do it for hours and hours, and like I love what I create, and I just love the process of creation. And I did that for a few years out of college. I was working at an Episcopal church because that's where a lot of my career has been. But I was working at Christ Church Cathedral in Houston, Texas, and there came a point where I enjoyed the creation, but I also felt like I wanted to be more in service. Like I felt like there was more that I could do or more I could offer in terms of actually setting direction and like helping to be in direct service. And so I felt fulfilled in a certain way, but I also felt like I wasn't doing it enough. Like I wasn't like there. There's a need for good graphic design, but the need is not as strong as the need for like people to be brought into community and people to have space. Um, And so I pursued a possible calling to youth ministry and uh, sorry, I'm trying to fix my mic. It's a little
yeah, yeah.
it's very close to my facial hair, which is probably making noise. Um, uh, and so I received an offer of a job in on Kauai to serve as a youth minister, and I thought about moving to Hawaii for a while, and then but I just felt like, again, that wasn't quite right. Um, and so that's when I moved to work for the Douglas Fenton at the Episcopal Church Center, and started doing young adult ministry, just feeling that there was the direct service felt more fulfilling, and I really missed the design aspect. Like, I love doing the communications aspect, but trying to find the way that, like, how do I bring that creativity to like the people side that I felt like was more direct impact has always been kind of a struggle for me in my vocation,
Yeah.
because there are things I really love doing, and they don't feel like they make a big enough difference quick enough for the pain and like the suffering that's in the world and the need that's out there. Um, so that's been something I've sort of tried to figure out. What is the balance between the thing that gives me joy and the need that I see and can identify, and also, like, I think we all have a lot of joys. So it's just a
Mhm.
matter of degree.
Yeah, and that's something you touched on too. I'm hearing in your journey, there's a process and there's different aspects of figuring out your vocation. Because I think um, when it's just framed as far as clergy, it's just like, okay, you're either a priest or you're not, or a deacon or
Yep.
not. And like, but even on that side, as you're always in discernment, even as if you have a set vocation, it's like, but what does that look like in this moment with this person? Or what does it look like as a part of this particular team in this
Mhm.
community, lay or ordained? I think we're always on the journey of trying to discern that. And in your journey, you're hearing that. And for me, I'm constantly in that place of trying to be open and serving where I'm at. And things kind of just change, I think sometimes that's a misconception. It's like, well, I wish I was like this person X who just knew what they wanted to do and always did that. Maybe there's some people who are like that, but it seems generally there's more people like what we're talking about of, well, I was kind of here for a little while and I was wrestling with it, or I found this aspect to be something that drew me. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think for somebody who's a layperson, like, you have circles that overlap. Like, you have your professional circle, and you have church, and you have home, and you have like friends, and I think especially as a clergy person, and just being the child of a clergy person, and also the husband of a clergy person, like, when those circles combine and your family is part of the church, which is your job, like, you don't realize that you're actually living out so many different vocations in each of those spheres, right? Like, which is really pronounced for me because my job is not church, and like, I have a vocation at church. um, I'm a lector, and that's really important to me. Like, I really enjoy and feel called to like reading the word. I also have been a young adult minister and like felt really called to that ministry at that time. um, I also know a lot about church polity, and so I can help with like committees
yeah, yeah,
and that kind of work. But then within work, I have a different like set of things that I am. And I have a different vocation that I follow as a managing director and as a manager of other people, but also as like a coach to school district leadership, and helping them think about like their work and their job and how they build leaders under them. And then I have my vocation at home as a husband, and now as a foster parent as of 2 weeks ago. Uh, so
wow,
discerning what that means and looks like. But I think I saw from my dad, at least, that like coming into a clergy position, all of that gets confused. Like, all of that gets mixed. And so there is the vocation of a clergy person, which is actually like many things. Like you said, in different situations, it means different things. And while you're always sort of called to that, and that's always a part of the identity, it's a lot easier for me to turn off and on things, because people at church don't necessarily know what I do for a day job, and people at my day job don't necessarily know about like the church I belong to and what I do there. Um,
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, that's just a reflection.
Yeah, no, that's great. This is awesome. So you touched on what some of your vocations are right now has been the work you do at the Holdsworth Center. Maybe we'll kind of just go a little bit some of your journey and how some of those things developed. New foster parent, all these things that are going on. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, and just kind of how some of those different vocations arose for you.
Yeah. So like I said, born in Colorado to a priest and like lived in the valley. And I think I sort of got a little bit of a calling to education when I was in third grade. I don't know why. This teacher, Yolanda Salinas, like just really, she reached out to me. She cared for me. Like she touched my life in a way that was really powerful. Um, and ever since then, like I was like, I'm gonna be a teacher all through the rest of school. Um, but then I graduated from high school and I went off to Stanford and studied many different things, none of which was education. And so I did not follow that path. And then I became a graphic designer. I mean, part of it was that I was exploring a lot of different identities and like trying to figure out myself as like a Latino and trying to figure out myself as a queer man and trying to figure out like my own gender identity and like how I thought about all those things and like being from San Antonio and being from more of a working class family. What does that mean now that I'm part of this like elite institution and how do I deal with that? And so I think I was grappling with a lot of that, both the privilege I was bringing, but also like the ways I had not necessarily had access to all of these worlds. And so that just my eyes were open to like all the possibilities. And I don't think I was able to like choose because everything felt so new and so overwhelming. Um, and
What
so
was
I
the
like,
genesis with you and Stanford? Sorry to cut you off there. What's the genesis with you and Stanford? How did you know someone that went there, or how did they get on your radar?
um, no, my guidance counselor said that there was a program I could apply to as a Latino to go for a weekend, a visitation weekend. And I applied and got in and went and was in California and realized that that was also, I think subconsciously realized that was somewhere I could come out and like it was far enough away and like there was an opportunity there and also just had a great time, met a lot of people who seemed very like-minded. And so I was deciding between there and like some schools on the East Coast and like it just the feel of the Ivies versus Stanford felt like it just felt more open and felt more like home. Um, and also just such an opportunity that I was like, how could I say no? And they gave me a lot of financial help as well to go there. Um, so that's sort of how I ended up there. I don't, and part of it came from my brother the year before me had applied to a bunch of schools and got into Harvard and decided not to go there. And I think that opened my eyes that like something was possible and that I could go for it and I should go for it and like I should just go and get out there and like pursue my dreams because I hadn't really thought about like we didn't talk about college a ton when I was growing up. And so I only applied to three schools or four schools, one of which was where my brother went at Rice. And uh, yeah, so I decided to follow it there. Like I felt my heart said that that's where I should be, and I felt happier, and so I went for it. Um,
So, okay, it's kind of a calling to education stuff. Stanford wasn't really about you studying education, and then the graphic design element was art seemed like it was already a part of your life. How did that kind of develop?
yeah, yeah. So I had a teacher in high school who was there's an electronic arts class, and I signed up for it. A friend of mine told me I should, and I signed up for it. And I had done like painting and different art just through art classes, and I always was taking art classes and enjoyed drawing. But he taught me to use Photoshop, which like changed my life. So he taught me Photoshop and some other like tools for 3D animation, and I just like I fell in love with it, and like fell in love with putting pictures with words with designs, like and just putting together sort of collages, which is basically what graphic design is in a lot of ways. It's like setting up the balance of all these elements, and love doing that. And I thought maybe architecture or advertising were paths I could take. Um, but when I got into Stanford, like there was no architecture program. It opened my junior year or my senior year. They opened the architecture program. Um, so I applied for some architecture program at Rice, but didn't get into that one. And then Stanford really didn't have something, and so I pursued. My brother was studying sociology, so I started in sociology, pursued that into comparative studies in race and ethnicity, started there, then moved over to American Studies, where I could look at social movements across different spectrums. So I looked at the women's rights movement. I looked at um, the civil rights movement, and then I looked at gay liberation and sort of looked comparatively across those. And then like that was sort of my step into what is this bigger picture I want to contribute to. And so I did a lot of graphic design in college for like t-shirts and programs and like flyers and all of that. And like it was all around like activism. So I was pursuing sort of where is my voice as an activist, and part of it was as an artist. Um, and one of the things I wrote my senior thesis on like sort of turning AIDS activism as a lens for looking at how do you bring forward if a society is willing to like erase certain kinds of people, um, which are LGBT people, but also like people with a disability or people who are sick. Um, how is that happening in the church? And so I was looking comparatively between like the AIDS activism and like gay Christians and what they were doing and saying, and how could I use my voice as an artist to like speak into that and to create art around what is the gay voice and how do you bring that voice forward without putting people in danger, emotionally or physically, so that they don't have to come out, but people realize that there is like a strong gay voice within Christianity and that it actually has a lot of gifts to bring to the church. um, and there again, like I do think that there's a vocation of like the queer Christian who like challenges our ways of thinking about our own bodies, our ways of thinking about like gender and the way that shows up for us, uh, but also the way that we like are able to confront the messiness of our own identities, and the ways that those aren't like picture perfect and sort of cut and dried, but are messy and we're figuring it out. Like we need the open space to be who we are and to explore who we are within our faith. Um, so all of that, like I knew arts was part of like the activism that I wanted to pursue. I just didn't know what that looked like.
Yeah,
Am I
yeah.
frozen?
You just, it's frozen up for a sec. If I can hear you. Okay, you're back. Yeah, you're good. So, okay, and then the graphic
Anyway, sorry, I
design.
feel like I'm rambling.
No, 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 that's good. And then the graphic design with the Episcopal Church, did you get hired on as staff to do that? Did that just arose organically there?
I did. So after college, I went and worked for a small little like news publication in the gay community in Houston. But then a friend of mine, Eileen O'Brien, who's a priest, now actually is my priest here in Austin.
Oh, cool.
She was the youth minister at the cathedral in Houston, and there first she needed me to help design like the youth room and sort of pick out the furniture and get it up to speed. But then their graphic designer got sick and ended up leaving, and so they hired me on to fill that position. And so I did that for a couple of years. And so it's a large parish. It's an entire city block in downtown Houston, and they have a bunch of nonprofits that are sort of under their umbrella. And so I did graphic design both for the parish, like the bulletins and the like seasonal programs and all of the different uh, programs that they do internally, but also a lot of their nonprofits. So I was working on just external and internal publicity.
Wow. And then I met you and you're part of the bishop's staff as the young adult missioner officer. So, and when I met you, I was fascinated just with everyone. I tend to be really interested in people when I meet. So I remember asking you a bunch of questions like, "What's your job like?" and "What do you do?" and just
Right.
really interested in how you're traveling around the Episcopal Church and equipping communities and learning people's stories. It's just really neat. And then you're putting on this discernment conference, which I mean really helped guide my life in some specific ways. So just well, tell us a little bit about what that was like. How did that arise, and what was that journey like?
Yeah. So Eileen actually handed along the job description because she'd received it from Ewart Jones, who was the diocesan minister, and so they passed it along, and I I was looking for something else because like I said, sort of I wasn't feeling as fulfilled in the job of just being a graphic designer. Like I didn't have my hands in the program that actually made the difference. Um, and so I was looking for something else, and I applied, had a good conversation. I mean, it was an interesting moment because it was 2008, like November, December. So Barack Obama had just been elected, and it felt like things were about to change. It felt like the world was like opening up, and there was creative possibility. And I could either like move to Hawaii and like be sort of in the middle of the ocean with no access to like that broader community and no like not making enough money to fly back and see people, or I had this opportunity to go and really like learn and travel all over the country and meet a lot of people. Um, and the way I understood it is part of it was going to be about communications. It didn't end up being that way because I hired a new entire communication staff, and there was just a different direction they went. But I knew that part of it was going to be also about like how do we reimagine or explore the Episcopal Church's vocation in young adults' lives? What is the vocation of the Episcopal Church for millennials? Um, which I just thought was a super interesting question. Like, and I think they wanted somebody who didn't really do young adult ministry like in a certain way. And my brother and I had started Episcorific, which was a
I
like
remember that.
web zine that was just like we did it kind of as a joke at first. We did the first one. My brother and I were living together in Houston, and it was around Bishop Doyle's election. And so we did like an issue that was just about like profiling the different candidates for young adults so that they would be interested and get involved in like the diocese around that. Um, and so that was like, it was fun because I got to design the thing, the whole booklet, like the whole magazine. I got to do a bunch of writing. And then I also was meeting people. And so my imagination was that it was going to be all these like web facing like communications pieces, but part of what I fell in love with about the job was that it was about creating spaces. And I think that's where I really realized that that was a big part of my vocation was how do you create the spaces where people can be like genuinely and authentically with one another and show up for one another so that they can grow and they can learn and they can sort of see themselves more clearly by seeing other people. um, and so the job sort of evolved over time, and YServe was a big opening for me for that. It was like, oh, you can create these spaces. Like you can just invite a bunch of people and like have an application, and the church has some money, and like we'll bring them here, and we can like explore what's important and how do we talk about what's important to each of us, how do we get to know each other, how do we show our identities, and then empower people to go and like serve in the church and serve beyond the church. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of that I worked on Bishop Catherine's staff was the Episcopal, what did I call it? Leadership Institute for Young Adults, ELIA. So I did a series of different events that were about a week long for groups of 20 or less young adults, where folks came together and like it was focused on one specific issue. So the first one we did was at the UN Commission on the Status of Women. So folks interested in gender equality on a global scale. And we did that 3 times, and it was a small group of like 12 to 15 young adults who just spent the week together really diving into who am I and how do I show up for this work. Um, and then we did one around environmental and economic justice, so the eco-justice immersion experience in Seattle. It was 20 young adults who came and spent a week, and we hiked and we went to farms and we like talked about it. And we sat with theologians, and um, we just sort of explored what does it mean, what are each of us bringing to this, but also what is the need in the world. And so I think that was, for me, that's where I found my vocation, was really like, how do I help somebody who's passionate about something already really see how their gifts can meet that need, um, and do it in community. Because I think vocation is best explored in community, because we can't always be honest with ourselves about who we are and what we bring, and so it helps to have a mirror. But also I think we learn from other people's learning, like how are they meeting the vocation and what can I see about that opportunity that they might not see. Um, so that's what I loved about
Wow.
that job.
I heard this. You always hear like apocryphal stuff. It's kind of like online when you see a quote and you have no idea if it's who it's from. Sometimes, and but I've heard this that St. Francis, when he would pray, oftentimes he would say to God, "Who are you and who am I?" And
Mm.
that just comes to my mind when you're talking. It really shines through my experiences of you as a young adult missionary too, of creating space for identity, and then talking about how does that fit into this larger service. The needs and the passions. How does that meld together? And then the artistic thing. I remember it was at a YSERV event. I came in as a participant, and maybe the next year I was part of the design team that helped put it together. And all the participants were there, and it was this exercise, but you let it off with a poem you had written during the arrival of everyone there. And it was just a very powerful thing. I was like, wow, someone's using their art and creativity for this space that you're creating, that moment to enter into. And oh, I forgot to, one of your vocations or identities is Phoebe's godfather. So we have this at her baptism, this beautiful angel you had in card with the prayer for the candidate, but also just it's just an incredible thing that's just been in her space, throughout her life, and just a really cool to see all those things come together and be expressed in your life. It's really neat. So yeah, I'm just bragging on you, but thanking you too. Okay, so and then after that, I remember you going to school, a really cool education opportunity, and meeting Josh and your current situation, fostering, but also a management consultant and the things you're doing there. We don't have to go through all of it, but just what's that been like? Talk to that a little bit about how that all developed.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are so intertwined because I do think there's like my own mental health has been a part of my vocation, and trying to find a
Mm,
space where I can be mentally healthy and mentally present. Mental illness is something that runs in my family, something I've struggled with throughout my life. And business school was as much about like I need to retool to like be more effective in the world because one, I was seeing in like across the church, and this is true across nonprofits, that like individual parish priests were being asked to transform their job to no longer be sort of here's a self-sustaining community with like financial resources, but how do I how do I become like an entrepreneur to find new ways of doing this? How do I engage the community that's changing rapidly and engage my community that's also like changing their relationship with church? And there was something new being asked of priests in terms, and there was not anybody filling the skill of like more technical skills around entrepreneurship and like management. um, and that's something I thought that I could bring. And so I went off to business school for that reason, because I really felt like I needed that set of skills. I also felt like I needed more discipline internally for how to solve a problem in a way that would not cause me incredible anxiety and
yeah,
that would allow me to be like a healthy human being. Um, and in business school, I found both of those things. I found that I gained new problem solving skills and like was able to come at things in a much healthier and more sort of structured way that allowed me to be more present. Um, but I also gained skills that helped me to problem solve for others. And so really enjoyed business school was great. I felt like I wasn't quite like coming from the church to business school was a big shock. And so I felt like I wanted a postdoctoral fellowship type thing for business school. And that's what I went into management consulting for that reason, because it was another 2 years of basically training on the ground. With I worked for a bunch of different organizations that were some were public sector, some were private sector in pharmaceuticals, financial services, a bunch of different uh, retail, all kinds of things. But just getting to see all the ways those organizations operate and being able to build skill there was super helpful in a way that empowered me to sort of say, okay, now I can go out and do kind of whatever I want to do and really move forward. But a friend of mine who worked as a consultant was starting up this organization that was in education in Texas. Um, and she was asking me to be a management consultant and basically base it on my organization and like what I'd learned there. And I was like, all the things fell into place. And it was hard to, I mean, I came home just like glowing to Josh and so excited. And he saw in my face, like, this is it. This is the thing that I've been waiting for that brings everything together. Um, where I'd be making slides all day long so I could do all the graphic design I wanted to. um, but I also was going to be like working with people, and I was going to help start an organization that I was like the eighth person, and now we're at 50 something. So I've helped to create that space, but I also create spaces in districts. Um, I think districts leaders face a lot of similar problems to parish leaders. Um, there's because I think a district is not that's dissimilar from a diocese, and then parishes are like schools, and so I just have been using that analogy to help me navigate. But I do think a lot of the business school skills have been helpful to sort of say, okay, how can I help you be a better problem solver and project manager? So there was a way that all these vocations kind of came together in Texas, and also Texas as home and like places, people that I know, and a place that I really care for, but also a place where I could be supported enough, and also by like my money goes a lot further here versus DC. Uh, but we could start a family and I could pursue that vocation. And so like this job has allowed us to build this house and like begin to be in a place where we can foster kids and hopefully eventually adopt some. But yeah, there was a way that things came together and like all the elements kind of lined up after a long process of just building skill over time and doing that iteratively until finding the right place and sort of falling into place.
So, okay, it's like these, not necessarily random dots, but like the dots were connected right now. It seems like in your life they kind of
Yeah.
converged. Along the way in those specific seasons or points of your journey, did you feel the angst of like, oh, I'm missing out, or this isn't what I'm wanting to do, or were you just saying, hey, this is kind of the next best thing? I mean, what was that like for you?
It really felt like jumping around. Like I did feel like, I mean, they were huge jumps, sort of going from, I mean, my public high school in San Antonio to Stanford was a huge jump. And then like going from being a graphic designer at a parish to like working at the national level, and then business school to BCG, and like that felt like a big jump. So all of this has felt a little bit erratic, and I was a little worried. One of the things business school teaches you to do is tell a good story, to paint that arc, which has been helpful because I think it is about like telling the story of how did I get here, and where could this be leading. Not necessarily because I can see that, but have I arrived at a place where I'm using the past at least, where I'm really leveraging what I'm bringing, because it has felt, I mean, until this opportunity sort of presented itself and I was able to step into it, it felt like I wasn't doing the thing I was meant to do. Like the church center job, there were moments when I really felt like it, but the organization itself was not sort of building me, and I felt like I was fighting in a lot of ways to create the space I needed. Same thing with the church, with the graphic design job. Like I was fighting to like want to do more, um, or in the management consultant, I felt like I wanted to push people. Like I was working for a major pharmaceutical chain, and I didn't. There were things that I didn't want to like. I wasn't supportive of, but and so how do I coach and talk about those things and bring up sort of my own moral beliefs about things, while also doing the job I was hired to do. So it's been every step has felt closer, but it wasn't clear exactly where I was going for sure.
Wow. I think that's one of the misconceptions. It seems like vocation means I'm trying to respond to this call, what I'm supposed to be doing, and um, but sometimes that's not all going to feel perfect or good or a good fit, but that it's all important and belongs in some way of those different
Yeah.
seasons. And I feel like sometimes there's a misconception that maybe if I'm called by God and this is the thing I'm supposed to do, it's going to be the fit. And I think I was talking to someone about sometimes relationships are viewed that way. Like there's that one specific person and they're going to meet all my needs and it's going to be the perfect thing. And um, there's kind of like this tightrope way of looking at vocation. You're either like fully in or you're completely off, you know. And I see that Um, Another misconception I feel like I heard with you in some of your journey, you had a teacher who awakened something in you, or you had a counselor who said maybe pursue this. There hasn't been the what you shared as far as Saul on the road to Damascus and you saw a light or thing. There was exploration, community speaking into your life, your brother, him influencing you. What are some things that kind of guided you as you've been taking the next right step for you? What did you kind of use to navigate through some of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way to put it because I think about that a lot of what is the most faithful next step, right? Like what is the next step that feels right and good and like is leading me closer to feeling that connection of self and need of the world. Because it has been, I mean, there's the emotions in those moments of like, does this feel like the right thing? And my closest thing to Damascus, the road to Damascus was probably when my friend Lindsay asked me to come to the Holdsworth Center, and like, she asked me if I knew of anybody at BCG who would be willing to go start this organization with her, and I was immediately like, I would love to do that. Um, but I do think, I mean, I go back to a bunch of conversations, like discernment conversations with friends who sort of said, um, like the choice to go and work for the church center or and the choice to not go for that youth ministry job and um, yeah, another priest friend, James Durkitz, sort of said to me like the problems that are with you now are going to go wherever you go, so don't run for those problems, like pursue the good, pursue the hope, um, which I think was helpful and sort of let me let go of like I'm trying to like not be this person, but no, I need to step into who is the person I want to be, that's already with me, and how do I help that person move forward. Um, I think those conversations have been helpful. Uh, had similar conversations around leaving BCG and the private sector and whether it was too early to leave management consulting or if I should have stayed there longer before going on to this organization. Um, and folks just sort of said like you've got to pursue, like you've got to take the opportunity that's in front of you. Like you've got to make the best choice. Like you can't project yourself 2 years down the road. You can't project yourself 3 years down the road. But like, what is the calling of this moment? And how to, I mean, you have to be practical in some ways, but like you have to accept that the information you have is like limited. Um, and so what is that next step, not the next 5 steps that you can see. So I think taking those moments has been helpful.
Yeah, and it's really highlighting to me in your story that even sometimes the way I frame the question or think about it, it's how's the individual figure out their way. And part of the tool is just the community, like really taking and valuing other people as a part and having those people in your life where you can trust and have those conversations about what you're feeling and wondering about and thinking about. It's not just you on a mountain somewhere having some type of insight. It's you were really walking along with people and to open yourself up to them and be able to hear and take seriously what people's guidance and input in your life was. I think that's an important skill, and that's made all the difference to the degree I can do that in my life. Of a lot of the growth has been how can I open my life to other people and trust other people with it to help me move forward. And I really see that highlighted in yours.
That's helpful, Kalo, because I think there are moments when I did not ask enough questions and sort of seek people's opinions, and I was not open to it. And those are the moments I'm not sure I made the best decision. Like
Hmm.
that I may have pursued like the path that was not like it still led me to where I am, and like that's great. But
Yeah,
I
sure.
would have made a different choice had I like opened myself up to people around me and to like listening, and to really having conversations that were not guarded. I think having a growth mindset about myself has been one of the biggest openings up. Like I and that was business, like the choice to apply to business school came out of a moment of really seeing that oh, I can change and grow. I can become something different, and I should want to evolve. Like there is something core, and like I think as an artist, the calling can feel like, oh, I need to get that like that truest, like most pure sense of what my artistic vision is out into the world. Um, Not that I'm like a constantly evolving thing. And like I think those are two ways of being an artist, and one can lead to sort of self-destruction and eccentricism, like in a way that I'm not interested in, and one that's like just an evolution, and like I'm constantly responding to the world around me to be able to say things. Um, yeah, and like you said, if we're not porous in that way, the process is much more difficult.
Yeah. We just a couple more things to end on. We've covered a lot. But what would you say, Jason, to someone who feels like they've missed their vocation or calling? I mean, I know every situation is individual in particular, but um, I think I've encountered that maybe even times in my own life where I felt like, oh, maybe I should have done this thing, or I felt like I was being drawn there, but I didn't have enough courage, or I was scared, or maybe I felt disqualified from that. What would you say to someone who feels like maybe stuck in that place? Just what would your thoughts be there? It might help them out of that.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I think that there's always moments where, like like I said, we just can't see far enough down the road to know what that vocation would have been. And so there will always be the imagination of something that never existed and will never exist. And so I think probably the first piece is letting go of that, not as it's not a reality. It's not something that was and you lost. It's actually not never been, and
Mm,
accepting that. But then like looking for the gifts and the way. I mean, I think looking back is a good way to sort of get to know what has the path been, and where are the different like trajectories that could be leading next.
mm,
So what are the steps I've taken, and how has that added up, and what could I how could I leverage all of that, all the good and all the bad and all the like pain and all the mistakes that I've made? What does that teach me that I can then pour into what is in front of me? Because I think it's really easy to get into a place of like the loss is a loss for self, but also like the gift is everything you've experienced for the world. And how do you like really look back to value that in the way the world does? Because the world is receiving you, and like there are people who care, and there are people who are looking to you for things you may not see. And so there's a need all around us, um, and you bring things that can serve that. And so I think for me, when I'm able to sort of zoom out to say, you know what, I may not be serving in all the ways that I want to in this moment, and like this may not be the need I care most about, but there's a need in front of me, and how do I like look back enough to value what they see? And I think in like past jobs, whether it's a church center or in business school or at BCG as a management consultant, like I think that's what I was seeking to do, or hoping to do, was like just show up in the way that I could, even if it didn't feel like the most fulfilling thing, knowing that if I take that next faithful step, hopefully it leads me closer to that. And if it doesn't, like the world is better for it. The need has been felt. So, I don't know if
no,
that's helpful, but
yeah,
some
yeah, no,
thoughts.
and I think I see here some freedom in yours of not getting so locked in and stuck of this one thing was it, and I just love the idea of not mourning something that didn't exist, like that projected future that wasn't there. Of there's more play in the system. I'm hearing from you of just okay, learn and see what you can offer. All of it can lead you uh, in service of others. I think that's great. um, let's see, one last question. Where could people go to learn more about the work you do or maybe even support your work, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently, kind of what that looks like for you, and where might people learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so the Holdsworth Center, we serve, currently we only serve in Texas. We serve school districts across the state, 13 at the moment, and we do leadership development. And so I think I'd invite people just to check out holdsworthcenter.org, to learn a little bit about how we're thinking about leadership. I think one, because educators are so important to our world right now and always are, but it's a little more visible right now. And the needs that they're facing are extreme. And I think it's a place of incredible hope. And so our resources attempt to bring the best of what's happening in the private sector, what's happening in education, into conversation to sort of say, what is the leadership that's needed? And we've been doing a lot of work sort of around crisis leadership and how are folks leading through this crisis. So anybody who's leading an organization or is curious about how educators are thinking, like we've got some resources and are happy to share, um, and would love support. Right now, we have a very generous donor who's helped us get off the ground, but are always looking for additional fans and supporters. So
Yeah, that's great.
that's about it as far as that. And then I think if folks in the church, there should be a survey hopefully coming out soon about just the state of the church. So I'm on the committee for the House of Deputies, the State of the Church committee, and so be interested in hearing people's thoughts and responding to that survey when you see it come around.
Awesome, great. That's great. And could you give us the website one more time for Holdsworth that we could learn more about?
Yeah, it's holdsworthcenter.org. So
Holdsworth Center.
HOLD, whole, like we use public education Holdsworth. So that's how you
Yeah, that's great.
spell it.
Awesome. Holdsworthcenter.org. Well, great, Jason. Thanks so much for sharing your life. I've learned a lot, and it's reinforced some ideas for me too, just to focus on also. And as always, it's just a pleasure to talk to you, and blessings on all your vocations right now, especially the new ones of fostering some really great kiddos. So thanks,
Yeah,
Jason.
thanks, Jeremy. Good to talk to you.